All right. Welcome everyone to the very first InstructLab community meeting. We have a pretty full agenda today, but before we start with the agenda items, we'd like to do a few housekeeping items just to go through them. First of all, if you're not familiar with the InstructLab Code of Conduct, let me share a link. Please do so, as our meetings are governed by the InstructLab Community Code of Conduct. And these meetings will be recorded and shared on our InstructLab YouTube channel after the meeting. We're also looking into live streaming the meeting at some point. I think we need to make sure the YouTube channel is capable of live streaming, which I need to do that at some point, but we will, share that information at a later stage. If you prefer not to be on camera, please feel free to turn the camera off and or join via phone call. You can hear the audio only. And if you have any questions, raise your hand and feel free to ask them. I think that's about it. Leslie, do you have anything to add?
Yes, if you don't mind, one thing that I would like to call folks' attention to, and we'll add a link in the community meeting minutes, but we've been communicating with a lot of our community members via our Slack workspace. And one thing that I have been noting as someone who's based in Europe is there are a lot of folks who are asking questions in hours when most of the core maintainer team is not available. And I feel kind of bummed out because I note that they ask a great question and then they go off to the next thing. And I don't know that they will return to see that someone has answered their question. So I want to encourage folks to also take this opportunity to subscribe to the project mailing lists as well, and to use that to ask any questions. If you don't get a response within like 15 minutes, please ask your question on the appropriate mailing list. It's usually the user's mailing list, so that we make sure that we can deliver the answer to your question directly to your inbox and we don't lose you in the noise that is the ongoing message scroll up. And I'll make sure that I get that linked in the agenda post-haste. Thank you.
All right, let's get started with the first agenda item, which is the history of InstructLab. Mo, are you on?
I am. Hello. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I had asked some of the researchers that invented the technique if they could make it, but they actually have another meeting they couldn't drop out of. So I will hopefully be a good steward of the history of the project. I understand that there are four main inventors of the technique, and that would be Akash, Shiv, Abhishek, and Kai. And they also have a teammate, Aldo, who worked on a lot of the backend code for InstructLab. But they basically were at an AI conference. The name of it slips me, but they were sort of all together in a hotel room, sort of like late night hacking as they do. And they came up with this idea, and they used free cluster resources that were available over this past Christmas break to do some experiments and see if the technique worked, and it did. They presented it at we have something at IBM called the technology team meeting in IBM research. So they presented it there, and our Red Hat colleagues who were present at the meeting were like, whoa, wait a minute. This is kind of a way, because up until the point of InstructLab, AI models are kind of a black box kind of thing where one organization with a certain amount of resources creates it and there's not really a way to upstream back into it. It's basically just a fork forever. And this technique enables sort of a community of contributors to collectively add to a model over time and be able to work together and collaborate rather than it just being like a one-off fine-tuning that just sort of forks off and maybe rises in the leaderboards and then drops off as another fine-tuning thing becomes popular. So at Red Hat, we were very excited about the technology just because it opened up that possibility of collaboration. So around, trying to think of the timeline, I think that meeting was in February, and I think, trying to remember, it was probably mid to late February, that we invited the research team who invented the technique into the Red Hat Boston office. And we ended up doing a bit of a hack fest, and a bunch of Red Hat folks who were interested kind of jumped along. And I think the tooling at the time that we first met up, okay, February 21st, thanks. The tooling at the first time we met up was only supported on Macs. And of course at Red Hat, we were very Linux oriented. So right out of the gate, we started adding Linux support and GPU support. And we added support for MLX, which allows faster GPU access on Macs. And, you know, over time, like we just kept adding features and doing what we do. And it's been a great collaboration. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to, I guess I would say too that when we were talking about how would we collaborate on this and how would, like, well, how would the mechanics of contributing to the model work? We looked at sort of a PR-based workflow using GitHub. And so to test out that workflow, first of all, we needed to sort of accept an initial PR and test it out. So my 8-year-old daughter has PR number 1 for the InstructLab project on the taxonomy repo, and she contributed jokes. And the before her contribution, when we asked the model, tell me a funny joke, it basically said knock knock and spit out an email template, like a business form letter email template. So that was our baseline. So once we took her contribution and we rebuilt it and we asked the model, tell me a funny joke, it told a joke about, how do you know this is not your cheese? This cheese is nacho cheese. And that was not a joke that was in her set. Basically, her set of jokes she contributed, that was like 7 or 8, I don't remember exactly how many. They basically tickled the latent knowledge that the model had from pre-training and kind of looked for the pattern. And they were all puns of a certain format. So it basically used that to find other stuff that it had. And it drew out this little nacho gem. So that was fun. And then our next step was we did internal pilots both at Red Hat and at IBM Research to basically see, will this PR contribution process scale? And we went through the process. We worked out some of the kinks. We're like, hey, I think we could do something here. The triager team kind of developed out of that process because, you know, when people are submitting stuff, you need somebody to review it, just as you do with code PRs. So a lot of like the initial processes and approach kind of came out of handling that pilot. And by the way, like we were expecting maybe a couple hundred people and we got over 3,000 people. So that was cool. I'm not sure. Should I cover the summit too? Would that be fair? Hey, Leslie.
I have thoughts. I would love for you to talk a little bit about kind of debuting the project at Red Hat Summit last week for those who might not have been there and who would like to hear about it. But I was wondering if we could take a quick pause and thank you for all of that wonderful introductory information. And also to just quickly, if anyone in the room did not know what some of the terms we used were, like MLX or triager or any of the things that make a lot of sense to us because we've spent the last 10 weeks living with our little Labrador puppy and growing it up into InstructLab. And just because we're familiar with that term does not mean that everyone in the room is. So please do not be embarrassed at all. AI is a fast moving area. I knew literally zero, maybe less than zero about AI when I was called in to work on this project on February 21st, along with Mo and the IBM research team and several of the engineers we have joining us. So if anyone has any points of clarification, raise your hand, mention it in chat. We are very happy to clarify. And if we are all experts or shy, we should continue with talking about Summit. But Mo, you've been on the spot for a while. I don't know, are there any of the members of the InstructLab team who were at Summit last week who want to speak up and share some of their experiences?
I guess I can do that.
Hi, Julia.
Hello. So I helped run the knowledge workshop at Summit. Kelly Brown and I put that together. It went incredibly well. We were expecting around 50, contributions, and we got around 191. So there were 2 different workshops that were going on. There was the iLab workshop and the knowledge workshop. We found that if people did the iLab workshop first, then the knowledge workshop was so much easier because they would understand like how it works, and then contributing made a lot more sense. One of the biggest things that we found was a lot of people do not know how to use a Mac. So that was definitely one of the biggest struggles, that and people not knowing their GitHub passwords. We had a few people leave when they saw how long the reset password was. But besides that, the feedback was great. And you know, the triage team has a lot of cleanup to do on the contributions, but once we do that, like, I think it'll be, you know, really great for the model. And then it was just like a great exercise, like teaching people how to do it. So very grateful for everyone's help there, and I'm very pleased with how it went.
Very good.
Hi, it's Kelly. The other really cool thing that happened was a lot of people were saying that this was like their first contribution to any open source project. So they were like, thank you for like helping us like walk through it. This is like the first time I'm using GitHub, or first time going through an open source project. And I was like, whoa, thanks for contributing. And it was great. But yeah, Julie explained that well.
I have thoughts to share if anyone would like to hear me emote. So I've been working in open source communities for almost the past 20 years. And I admit to being somewhat skeptical about how AI technology is being developed and used, because I am someone who deeply values the principles of open source software, which is one of the reasons why I'm proud to work at Red Hat in our open source program office. And I am not only delighted by the ways in which this project developed as an internal only project between IBM Research and Red Hat, with the stated intent to be as open as possible, going from a completely closed proprietary system on day one, February 21st, 2024, to what we were able to achieve in just, I guess it was 9 weeks last week, with a dedicated team working very, very hard to bring this out to the public, and also just absolutely overwhelmed and delighted with the number of contributions that we were able to receive, helping folks walk through the workflow on the show floor. Also want to acknowledge that we're really grateful for everyone who visited us, because we learned so much about how we can improve the project and make it easier for folks to contribute based on those initial experiences. And we're gonna get into that a little bit later in the agenda. And also delighted that we have so many fellow travelers here with us in the InstructLab project, who are not only helping us to improve the offerings of InstructLab, but who are also asking us good questions about what is our overall roadmap for opening up different parts of the project that may be closed now. Folks are used to everything from Red Hat being, open source from day one. And as Red Hatters, we pride ourselves on that. And I'm going to be honest with everyone here. I am grateful for those questions, because they're deeply important to me. And I will let you know that you may ask questions like that of Red Hat and IBM folks today, tomorrow, next week. We don't have all of the answers about when we're going to be able to make certain aspects of the project open and available, but that is what we are working towards, and we are committed to that. So keep the questions coming, and be patient with us when we say we don't have an answer right now. This is our 10-week-old puppy. And I guess there's a metaphor there about some sort of leash training or something that I'm not clever enough to make. But thank you all for being here and coming along with us on this journey. I'm legitimately excited about this, and it's been a long time since I was excited about things in technology. So I shall stop emoting now.
Any more questions or comments?
So, from what I understand, this there's the front end where people can contribute new data, right? And add that to that. And then there's a retraining that happens on some back end. Is that correct? And that retraining presumably uses significant infrastructure, right? Do we have targets where you're really excited to apply this to? I'm just wondering about alignment of communities. There's all this effort towards retraining models in academia and stuff. I'm just wondering about what are killer use cases that we would want to target and demonstrate.
I have
I
opinions.
think, oh,
Mo should share her opinions because she's much closer to this than I.
well, one of the things I would say is when we're InstructLab as a project is we're looking primarily at small parameter models. And the thought is sort of, this is my own personal, I don't speak for the whole project. This is my own personal take on like where we'll probably end up going and like where the use cases would be, is we focus on small models because small parameter models, they're faster, take lower resources to train. They're faster and take lower resources to do inference with. And so kind of think of the Unix way, where you have like a lot of small, specific fit for purpose tools. I see over time, and this is why we constructed the taxonomy tree the way we did, is I could see over time it becoming sort of a Wikipedia-like set of content and curation. And over time, what you might do is like trim off a branch and sort of have a model just tuned to that specific domain. So you could have a set of smaller models that are very deep into one subject matter, because that's all you need. Like one of the issues that I see is someone with a long background in user experience engineering. All of these general models, like general purpose, they can do everything. They're very large, they're very expensive to run, they're very expensive to train. They often go off the rails. Like, for example, there's been a number of lawsuits. I remember one in particular was somebody who had a car dealership where they had an LLM-powered customer service agent thing that sold somebody a car for $1. Like, one of the biggest risks to organizations when they deploy these things, when they go a little bit out of bounds and do things like that, and the business gets held responsible. And I think personally the power of an LLM is interpreting user input, because user input can be very broad. It may not fit into the exact, I mean, that's sort of some of the trick of working with computers, like human computer interfaces, is that the computer wants things in a very specific format, and it's on the user to learn the skill of providing input to the computer in a specific format. LLMs kind of open that up, in that the user could use natural language that maybe is vague in terms of what the computer can understand and interpret that. Where LLMs are a little bit intimidating is when they output non-deterministically. So one of the ways you can approach that is make their output limited to just a small problem domain. So like that is the use case that I see. And when you have a series of these different models that are very specifically, narrowly scoped, but very deep in a specific subject matter, and you have a community of experts who are very passionate and trained in that subject matter, helping curate them, then that helps sort of, it helps them make sure that there's not like misinformation coming out of models. It helps sort of establish a place where that can be done collaboratively, rather than some random large company with lots of resources making some large general model that just spews out stuff that really isn't checked by experts. So that's sort of the killer use case I see out of it, but that's my own personal opinion. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that if I was to, I think what you just said makes a lot of sense to me. This is total ignorance, as you know, I'm just a kernel hacker. But the partly, I guess, in terms of those use cases, it sort of feels like most of LLM development is to help students cheat on assignments, or drive script writers out of work in California, or do all these kinds of things, rather than solving our problems with carbon capture, or these sort of fundamental problems that society is facing that some of these things could help with and stuff. One of the things that would excite me is if there's targets to actually address societal problems or problems of kind of broad interest like that. And it feels like an open source kind of approach to addressing that is the right way to do that. So I'm just kind of curious how you relate, not to sort of the ratcheting down for business things, but the actual problems we want to target with this and building communities around those problems.
Thanks, Aran, for that discussion. And I think this is a great topic that warrants even more discussions. And I suggest that we can bring some of this to the mailing list or Slack to talk further about it. We do have a few more items on the agenda, so I would like to get a move on. Julia, you were talking about some of the experiences at Red Hat Summit. Would you like to share about the Knowledge Bounty Program?
Yes, absolutely. So you mean like the steps for it?
I think the agenda item was, what is the InstructLab Knowledge Bounty Program and why did we do it? So maybe you can share some
Oh yeah. So
findings from it.
basically what we had them do is we made issues, and so for each, bounty, as we called it, we'd have one issue, and in the issue, it would have the topic, it would have a YAML file, and the YAML file would have information for where the markdown file is located. And then it would have the attribution.txt file as well. And so that one was completely filled out. So people didn't even have to touch that. They also didn't have to touch the markdown files either. It was just the YAML file. So what they would do is they would look through the issues, choose a topic that, was interesting to them. And another thing is all these topics, we went through and double checked that the model, got some questions wrong so that, we knew that it was a good knowledge contribution. And so, so then once they, chose a topic, they would download the files, read the Wikipedia page, make a fork of taxonomy, and they would fill out their YAMLs, like the Q&A pairs. And they would do that following the Wikipedia page. So, just reading through and coming up with question and answer pairs, putting them in the YAML file. Once they had a minimum of 5 Q&A pairs, then they would, save the files, make sure all the names match correctly, and then find the correct place in the taxonomy tree, which was also indicated in the issue. And then, add the files there, open the pull request. And so that was, just the very, very basics of a knowledge contribution to the InstructLab taxonomy repository.
Cool. So what's the motivation behind the bounty program?
So the motivation is that you get to contribute knowledge to the model. At Summit, we were also, if people did both labs, they got a sweatshirt. So that was definitely part of the motivation at Summit. But again, as Kelly mentioned, a lot of people, this was their first time contributing to open source. And, we had 15, 20 of us around to help. So it was a very safe place to do your first contribution. And I think a lot of people really liked that. Yes, there are steps. We can post, I don't know, Leslie, where would the best place to post the knowledge bounty steps be?
So I think that, I think what we should do is, first of all, for folks who were at Summit and want to replicate the experiments we were doing there, or who were not at Summit, because not everyone was in Denver at Red Hat's annual conference last week, surprisingly enough. We're going to put together the walkthrough demo guides and put them in our GitHub repository so you can perform that experiment at home on your own laptop. And then I think as part of that, we will probably also put together the step-by-step guide to doing a knowledge submission, because right now our submissions for knowledge are limited to using data sources from Wikipedia, because we know that that data has been deeply vetted by the Wikipedia editing team across a wide variety of axes, including, accuracy, filtering for hatred, abuse, profanity, personally identifying information, and all that. So, as we are rolling out our new community in this new experiment, we're trying to be as responsible as possible as we're doing things that actually update the model taxonomy and allow for additional data submissions that will train the model. I do want to take a quick pause because we're talking about the Knowledge Bounty Program, and we have had an excellent question in meeting chat, which is, can someone explain to me how knowledge and skills are different? And I wish to thank the person who asked this question, because this is probably the most confusing topic that we have had come before us. And we are very happy to once again explain that. And I am looking forward to having it explained to me again. I see JJ has raised his hand. JJ, do you have an awesome answer to this question? JJ has gone silent. The answer is...
Yes, sorry about that. Thank you.
Welcome back.
Yeah, there you go. Hard mute is a problem. So first of all, I want to just offer this to everyone, that as someone who, it took me a very long time to understand the differences. I've been living and breathing this for quite a while now, as my friends here know, but it took me a long time. And what I came up with was a metaphor to kind of explain this going on. Knowledge is like that, so knowledge is like a chapter in a book, right? Like a textbook. And then the last page of that chapter in the textbook, you have a bunch of questions to see if you've actually been able to answer all that thing that was in the previous chapter, right? So when your teacher does something, they give you those questions, and I know I was a bad student, so I never did them, but you're supposed to do them, right? Skill is taking all of that knowledge and giving me a new ability, or it a new ability, or it a new ability to understand it in another way. It's not just manipulation in the sense of prompt engineering, but it's actually giving a actual skill to understand something new. We use the analogy of like business processes and things like that. That's easy to grasp. When you start thinking more abstract, it gets a little bit crazier, and it's really fun to see what humans can think are new skills. Does that help?
Yeah, but JJ, to be clear, when you would use your analogy, the knowledge is not only the book chapter and the questions, but it's also the answers to the questions. Don't all three make up knowledge?
Yes. So when you do the Q&A file, it asks for questions and answers, and then you have the markdown document beside it, which is the chapter, if you will. Sorry, I should have made that clear.
Yes, Mo.
Hey, one explanation that Akash uses too, to explain sort of the difference between knowledge and skills. And JJ, I love your analogy. I've used the same one, like it's like the chapter quiz kind of thing for the knowledge versus the Q&A. When you're doing a skill, it's something that if you had a few points on a graph, you could infer where the curve of the line was, whereas knowledge is more like facts, and you could have different points on a graph, but you have no way to infer where that curve is. So facts, like a fact is just a fact, and it's not a pattern, it's just a fact. So if you think of knowledge as facts, and you think of skills as sort of like a pattern, or like some of our docs even explain like a skill is like performative, right? Like write a poem, or say, I'll give a more specific one, like a limerick. It has a specific pattern, and this is the pattern you follow. Versus knowledge, which is like, I don't know, the history of the American Revolution. That's a set of facts. You can't just guess based on George Washington being born on a certain date when Thomas Jefferson might come into the picture, right? So that maybe helps. I mean, the visual of like where the graph and like you can infer or not the curve is something that kind of helps me think through it.
Nishis, you have a comment or question?
Yes. A follow-up on the same thing. As you mentioned, the difference in knowledge and skill, like I do understand it theoretically, but when we approach it from the aspect of training, At the end, it's the training set, which is the Q&A pair on which the model is getting trained, irrespective if it's knowledge or a skill. So at the end, it's going to learn from the training Q&A, that is question and response. Now, if my knowledge pool is huge, I need to generate as many Q&A pair for it to learn. And then the second aspect of this question is, when we retrain, are we changing all internal weights or just the top layers for it to actually learn the knowledge part of it?
Yes, Oleg. You're on mute.
Maybe type in the chat and we'll read your question aloud.
I think we should definitely do a knowledge versus skill video and put it on YouTube sometime.
We do have a document. I believe it might need some updating. But now that summit's over, we can definitely do that. I think a video is a great idea too.
Can we please make it involve playing our favorite game of D&D? Because that would be epic. Tabletop RPG nerd in me signs up for that video.
Yes, Fabian.
Hi, I've got a question about the taxonomy, maybe because I'm not too familiar with it, but it is a big tree that you need to understand where to put the knowledge and or the skill that you want to generate the synthetic data with. What are the so what would happen if you don't put the knowledge or the skills or the Q&A that you are using in the right taxonomy part? Does it have any consequence in when you are generating the synthetic data and trying to teach the model? I hope it makes sense, my question though.
Your concern is where you put your contribution in the tree, how it might impact how it would show up.
Yeah.
So yes and no. Where you put it in the tree helps with context, but if you put it in the wrong place in the tree, it's not detrimental. And when you make your submission, the triagers have enough background knowledge on this that they can suggest moving it to a different place in the tree if they feel that would be appropriate. Go ahead, JJ.
Thank you.
Your friendly triager representative speaking up here. So yes, Fabian, you have identified a friction point is a good way to describe it, because one of the examples I like to use is we have knowledge / history, and then / like monarchs, and then somebody might come in with knowledge British_history / monarchs, right? Like, is that the same? Is that different? The interesting part is back to what Mo was saying a few moments ago. The triagers have decided, and there's a link in the chat up there, that we're trying to put in an official policy of reflecting exactly what the Wikipedia triage or the taxonomy tree is. We're discovering that we might as well, and then we can also, when people bring in a Wikipedia article, we can actually see where they put it in Wikipedia, so we can say, hey, this should be over here. Obviously, there's going to be differences there. People are going to put in other stuff eventually, but we'll at least have a taxonomy tree that professionals, or I should say skilled people, have already created, and we're not building from scratch. So hopefully that answered part of your question there. It is a moving target, and the triagers are attempting to do the best we can with it.
Yeah, no, it does, definitely. Thank you very much both.
Thanks, Fabian and JJ. Richron, did you have a question?
Yeah. Thank you. This is super helpful. I got a question regarding knowledge, right? So what if I have 1,000 documentation and each file has like 200 pages? How does it work to include this knowledge in the model? And how do you generate the training data for this? Like what process do you go through to generate those training data?
OC, are you on the call to answer this? I feel
Yes.
like you might be the best to answer that question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, so for if there is 1,000 documents or 100 documents in the pool, we go through a chunking process on the back end to make sure that we are covering the Q&A samples that are generated, cover all aspects of the document. And to Oleg's point, like you mentioned, even if it's 100 versus 1,000, the number of Q&A samples, it needs to cover that area. The knowledge document area is somewhat similar, so we do not need a dramatically more number of Q&A samples. But I think at the triaging step, maybe JJ, Julia, y'all can give more clarity. I'm sure there's sort of a limit on the number of documents that we want to allow in each pull request. But typically, at least the backend process makes sure that all parts of the document are covered during the Q&A generation process.
Got it. So basically, maybe another follow-up question, like what is the size of the chunking that you do? Is it depends on the teacher model or you have a limit size? The question I'm asking is, so if I have like 200 pages documentation, right? Basically, if you do the chunking, you're just taking this like first paragraph, first page, and create a Q&A based on that. And if something is connected from like page 1 to page 5, there's no way that you can make it. Just want to make sure if that's like the right understanding here.
Yeah, so the chunking on the front end and chunking on the back end, there's slight differences. On the front end, you can sort of like specify the chunk size, or you can also split the document into preferred sizes or chunks to make sure that the algorithm is not splitting your document midway or through like in bits that is not humanly understandable. But on the back end, the chunking is sort of slightly more intelligent, where we parse through the markdowns and make sure it can also support different file formats. But currently for markdowns, we make sure that it's being done per headers or per markdown divisions. And typically it's fixed number of tokens based on those headers. So it is going to make sure that it's the most reasonable chunk possible. But there is some work going on right now to make sure that when we split across pages and when we split across different sections, we can get context into the same chunk. We do not split it across different chunks. So there's some work going on there, but yeah, just to highlight that the backend and the front end chunking is slightly different. Backend's a little bit more aware.
I got it. Thank you.
All right, thanks for the great questions and responses. Let's move on to the next item. JJ and BJ, would you like to share about the lessons learned from the first more than 100 pull requests?
Yeah, and hi everybody again, JJ. Unfortunately, BJ couldn't make it here, but he's given me some points to bring up. Unless BJ, you are here and you lied to me. No, okay, just checking. So I'll go over the things he said first, and then I want to bring up a couple examples, and hopefully that'll start some conversations here, because this is, as I was saying earlier, a moving target. One of the processes of actually going through this is we learned that humans have some struggles writing some stuff. So first of all, the context of a lot of the take a step back. When somebody actually puts in a PR inside of the process, if it's a skill, it's usually just a Q&A file and an attribution. Q&A, I say Q&A, but Q&A.yaml. And then with the knowledge, there's an extra section on there that points to a location where somebody has hosted another markdown file. But most of the time, it's more or less the same. So if you ever go into the taxonomy directory, you can kind of see that in case you didn't know. And look for the triage approved tag, which are the good ones that will be approved into the to get actually merged into the tree. just to make sure everyone understood that process. Now, in that, in the Q&A file, we noticed that a lot of people don't fully write out questions, right? They don't actually add questions to it, which is quite frustrating. And also they don't use complete sentences, which is we've discovered also quite often, is that they just kind of put in like color of red hat, and the answer is red. And they put it into a knowledge document about worker bees, as an example. People were just trying to fill the stuff out. So back to that analogy of the textbook, it's kind of like when you're being a bad student and trying to fill out the questions quickly. It feels like there was a lot of those types of questions that came in for people in the process. There are a significant number of contexts on the avoid list that is posted quite a few places. And unfortunately, we still have some people trying to put in those types of questions and answers and skills. So we noticed that even we did have some people who tried not to do what was on provided by Kelly and Julia. They tried to do their own, which was neat, right? Like we want people to engage and learn from this. And one of the major issues we saw over and over and over again was humans have a problem with writing YAML. If you notice here on line 6 here, how the YAML is written, the linter catches this, which is very nice. But one of the things we saw was it was people would copy paste the answers, but they wouldn't fully grasp what YAML is, which causes quite a bit of frustration because obviously the linter would break and our stuff cannot work with that. Another issue we saw is if you notice here, knowledge laws, US traffic laws, which is the taxonomy tree where it was located. We had people who actually attempted to commit to the root of the taxonomy tree, which was an interesting observation because, is that not, I'm not sharing that, share this tab instead, I'm sorry. As you can see here, the actual root of the directory, they put it right at the top of the tree, which causes some problems because you needed it back to the statement of the taxonomy tree to find out where all these questions are supposed to be. We needed to add that. So we saw interesting consistencies over and over again with a lot of these things. This could be the aspect of the lab. This could be a lot of different things. But when you open this up to a lot of people, the triagers we aren't actually spending a lot of time looking at the data right now because we're actually doing a lot more cleanup when it comes to this, which is fine. I mean, that's what we signed up to do, but it's an interesting observation because even with those very clear instructions that I know Leslie's going to be handing out to everybody soon, right, Leslie? Take note that there will be those steps still can go off the rails. Does this help? Does people feel like this is valuable? I can keep talking about this, but I know Richung, you have your hand raised? Yes.
Yeah, sorry, too many questions for me. I think this is great. I like the community approach, but I feel the main challenge with community is that you get like random people, dropping like, the other guy. But the real question here is who's playing the God role here and decide what to merge into this not, and how do you make sure the knowledge is accurate, like all the PR is accurate, like not biased?
Go ahead, LH. It's all you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so that's the €1 million question. And that's actually one of the reasons why we're starting out with taking knowledge submissions and restricting the data sources to Wikipedia, because we have a good level of assurance that that content has met a certain level of quality standard before actually ingesting it into the model and retraining the model with that information. And again, it's a very young project, and admittedly, we have not fleshed out a rigorous set of parameters on how to do that long term, which is why we are currently restricting knowledge submissions to just Wikipedia articles, because there is a robust set of criteria in place for submitting information to Wikipedia and having it vetted by folks who are, if not authorities in their own domain, then at least authorities in checking actual sources cited and making sure that the sources that are cited are legitimate sources of knowledge. I have some thoughts about how I'd like to see this develop in the future. But they're also the thoughts of someone who is a community engagement professional and certainly not an expert in large language models or artificial intelligence. But I can see, for example, creating guidelines around taking in content that is available from any one of the many openly accessed scientific publications, like PLOS, for example, would be one that I can think of off the top of my head, in order to make sure that we're getting high quality content. Regarding the question of how do we confirm that we're not introducing bias into the model? Honestly, we're in the process of performing those experiments as we speak, as we're developing the project. Before we released InstructLab to the general public, we did a wide inner sourcing exercise with folks from Red Hat and IBM contributing and kicking the tires, as it were, on the project. And we quickly discovered that we didn't want to teach the model how to tell a bunch more jokes, and we didn't want to teach the model how to have it teach the model how to write poetry, because we realized that we were introducing unconscious bias into the model, because as an English language only model, we were introducing bias based on being a native speaker of English and not actually being able to necessarily understand idiomatic phrases that may be completely obvious to me as a native speaker of English growing up in the United States of America, but that would not necessarily make sense to somebody else. So TLDR, we are going to do our level best to continue making this project be as filled with high quality information as possible, and to make sure that we are not introducing bias. And when we discover places where we may have erred, we go back and we fix it. Nothing's perfect out of the gate.
Super helpful. Sorry, just one last question, I promise. So I believe most of the large language model or even smaller language models are already trained on Wikipedia. Does that mean that we have nothing to contribute afterwards? Because literally every Wikipedia page is already ingested in the other models, right?
So I can actually take that. Jeremy, he put a demo together about the softball issue and fixing something that was wrong inside of the model. So yes, it may have been trained on the model before, but Wikipedia is wrong, right? And there is a point in time, which I still have not actually figured out exactly what that is, but this was when that model was trained on some of that data from wherever we built the original training data from, and some of that information is wrong. We've discovered also Puerto Rico, the time zone for Puerto Rico is technically wrong inside the model also. So someone has come together with a PR to fix the US time zones for us. So there is a real story here of us, even though we are taking it from Wikipedia, some of the Wikipedia information is wrong. So we can actually come back and just figure it out. Like, oh, hey, we need to change this or whatever. So yes, it does seem redundant, but it is what fine tuning is, right? It's fixing the errors inside of the model. Did I lose you? Does that make sense? Yes, it does. It does keep changing every day, and that's part of the fun of this, right? Where we get to at least with using Wikipedia as our first source of truth. Does it make sense?
Yes, makes sense. Thank you.
Sure. One last thing before I'll give the baton back to Carol there. I did want to just point out this right here, this me sharing my screen right now is an interesting data point that we just kind of found out, is that out of the 218 open pull requests we have right now, we have 131 with what we found were issues. And that's not with all of them done. When I did the numbers last night, that's about 60-something% of people coming back who have not done something correctly. This is a good data point to recognize that the UX is something that we need to work on and revisit, because if 60% of the people you're trying to do can't really, get it done the first time, there's got to be a better answer there, especially if you want adoption from people that are not just engineers. I do want to highlight that we do have some initiatives to try to resolve that in multiple different forms, which is really cool. But it's a good recognition of something we need to think about, because you spend more time dealing with syntax than actually the content that's coming into the model. Does that make sense?
Yes, Leslie.
Carol, I was just wondering if with your permission, if I could share a poll with our attendees, just because I am curious how folks turned up at our meeting, and I would love to know, like, should we be spending more time on Slack or GitHub, or how did you find out about us? It's the first question people ask. So I'm going to launch the poll, and if folks wouldn't mind responding, that would be great. Thank you.
That would be great. Thanks. And thanks, JJ, for sharing that. And sorry for the unwanted interruptions. I'll make sure that doesn't happen in our future meetings. We do have one last agenda item. Perhaps we can, Charlie, if you can take 5 minutes to share what's new in InstructLab, what's coming in this week release and stuff like that.
Sure. Yeah. So I was specifically going to talk about my new PR that I'm introducing. Let me share my screen if that's okay. Application window. Here. Should be seeing it in a sec. It should be a GitHub window. If my computer wants to let me. Okay. Cool. So what this is it is a pull request to introduce the backend flag to the train. So while we were at Red Hat Summit, we realized some issues with the MLX backend, in which some of the training results were not as good, and we were hitting some other issues with storage being used and stuff like that. So we were messing around with using PyTorch from top to bottom, and we realized that PyTorch has a new, relatively new device type called MPS, which has similar hardware acceleration to MLX. So what this PR is introducing is a -- backend flag that lets you either specify PyTorch or MLX as the backends on Mac OS. And in my testing, it's been pretty good, and it's yielded models that have better results in terms of what they're being trained on than with MLX. We actually used one of these models at Summit, and we had pretty good results. I also cleaned up a little bit of train because there was some flags that were only Mac OS specific or Linux specific. I think, and I added some flags like FP16 or BFP16 to train, because a lot of the stuff was hard coded because Linux train was relatively new. So I made a lot of it, option based rather than just being hard coded. So I just kind of wanted to share this because I wanted to make sure that people knew that it existed. So you can use that -- backend equals PyTorch or -- backend equals MLX on a Mac, and you should see sort of different output, but hopefully better results with the PyTorch backend, because MLX is relatively new, but it does have really great hardware acceleration. So that's the reason we opted to go with MLX first. But PyTorch is more stable and has been shown to yield a little bit better results, even though it takes a couple extra minutes, I've found, in training. So that's the big thing that I think is going to be merged into main relatively soon. I know we also have a new release coming up that I think Nathan might have wanted to talk about, but if there's any questions on this train, I'd be happy to take them, or I can go more in depth into what exactly I did. But that's pretty much a high level view of how I changed things up.
Cool.
So
Look
with that,
forward to that. Yeah. Any questions for Charlie or comments? All right. Thanks for everyone for sharing. Yes, Leslie.
I was just wondering, well, let me stop wondering and make a statement. I'm going to send a follow-up email to the community mailing list. So folks can ask any follow-up questions they have from this meeting. But also to let folks know, we're planning on opening a PR every week on GitHub. And we will follow up with a note to the mailing list for folks who feel less comfortable using GitHub, because not everyone was born being in love with GitHub, about topics that you'd like to see us discuss in future meetings, so that we continue to have a robust agenda that takes the full hour, and enjoy spending time together. Thanks.
That sounds great. Can you also post that information on the Slack channel, please?
Absolutely. Will.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll be sure to clean up the recording and have the transcripts shared as well. Actually, one last thing before we end off, Jeremy shared one important reminder that this is an open community and we're definitely looking for contributors from all kinds, not just the PRs to the skills and knowledge, but also triaging. We need help there, and we have that triaging process documented. So if you're interested to help with that, we'll share that information as well. Any last comments? Yes, Julia.
And as I put in the chat, triagers have a daily meeting from 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. EST. So if you're interested in that, feel free to join, and information about that can be found in the triage Slack channel.
Thanks, great information. We'll share all of this together with the meeting. We'll add this to the meeting minutes, so all the information will be available. All right, thank you everyone for the great first community meeting. We will see y'all weekly after that, and continue these great discussions and contributions. Thank you.
Thanks all. See you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.